Welcome to the deep dive. Pull up a chair, because today we're plunging into something truly fascinating.
We really are.
It's a perspective on the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, that sees it woven right through the heart of Scripture, like a consistent, deliberate pattern.
That's right. We're diving into a stack of sources you've shared with us, and they're all centered around this concept they call a divine design.
Okay.
It's a viewpoint that suggests this particular appointed time, Shawbhuwwowth, is more than just a historical date.
More than just one event.
Exactly. It's seen as a marker of divine initiation that shows up repeatedly right across biblical history.
And our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack that idea for you. To see how, according to these sources, Pentecost isn't just, say, the giving of the law or the outpouring of the Spirit in Acts.
Which are the big ones people think of.
Right. But it's presented as a foundational, recurring thread. And we understand this deep dive is specifically tailored for you, directly from your sources, highlighting your request to explore this very message of divine design.
And the sources are very clear about something crucial for approaching this perspective. Yeah, they really encourage you to set aside, as much as possible anyway, any traditional ideas, cultural filters, maybe even linguistic habits that might, inadvertently make it harder to perceive this underlying design they're talking about.
So kind of clear the slate mentally.
It's an invitation, really, to look at the text with fresh eyes.
It's definitely a view that asks for an open mind. Now, as we navigate some of the terms used in your sources, specifically scriptural Hebrew terms.
Right, there are quite a few.
We want to give you a quick guide to the transliteration system they use. It's just a practical tip that should help as we go through this.
Yeah, absolutely. The source provides this system, which is helpful. So when you see an A transliterated as ah, it's always pronounced like the A in father or awful.
Okay, got it, like father.
And if there's an H right after a consonant, like in B8, for example, it turns that stop sound into what's called a fricative. Think of the B or V sound you might hear in Spanish when it's between vowels. A softer sound.
Okay, like a beach.
Then the ow sound is always like the ow in own.
Ow as in own. Simple enough.
And the is consistently pronounced like the in thing.
Thin. Oh,
yeah, so we'll try and point these out as we encounter the terms, just to help keep things clear.
Perfect. Okay, so let's jump right into the core idea here. Pentecost as this thread running through time. The source posits that Shawbhuwwowth, there's that awe and the,
Shawbhuwwowth,
is a consistent marker of divine initiation appearing over and over again.
Yeah, it's presented not just as a single feast, but as a fundamental part of that divine design we mentioned.
Woven in deep.
Deeply woven into the very structure of Scripture. And the sources describe it with three powerful ideas: a feast of conception, a feast of covenant, and a feast of commissioning.
Conception, covenant, commission.
Those three concepts seem really key to understanding the pattern they identify.
Okay, so where does this pattern allegedly begin? I mean, how far back?
The source takes us all the way back to Bereshith. That's Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 through 19.
Genesis 1, day 4 of creation.
Day 4, exactly. This is where the Creator places the sun and moon in the sky. But the text specifies they're there for more than just light. They're for signs, for appointed times, for days, and for years.
Ah, appointed times. That sounds significant.
It is. The sources highlight that the Hebrew word is modium. Remember that ow, like an O marriage?
Yes, right.
And this exact same word, modium, is used later in Leviticus chapter 23 to list the specific feasts, the appointed times of YHWH, including the Feast of Weeks.
Which leads to Pentecost.
Which leads to the day of Pentecost. So there's a direct linguistic link, they argue.
Okay, so it's not just about telling time, like a clock.
That's what the sources find fascinating here. This act on day 4 isn't just setting up a cosmic clock. They see it as establishing a heavenly calendar, embedding a sacred rhythm into creation itself. And doing so prophetically. It's like setting the stage, timing-wise, for future key moments.
Like what kind of moments?
Well, they see it foreshadowing things like the giving of the Torah at Sinai. The very conception of the Messiah.
Conception itself.
Yes, and the outpouring of the Ruwahh HaQowdesh, the set-apart breath. There's that Ruwah with the fricative H and HaQowdesh.
Ruwahh HaQowdesh, got it.
This act in Genesis is seen as setting a divine timing mechanism for these major interactions between heaven and earth.
So the idea is that time itself is patterned with these divine appointments.
That's the perspective. It offers a different lens, doesn't it, through which to view history and the unfolding divine purpose.
It really does. And speaking of rhythm, a foundational element tied to Pentecost is the pattern of sevens, right? It's baked into creation week itself.
Absolutely. That 7-day cycle is fundamental. And later, you get the specific instruction to count 7 complete weeks. That's 49 days starting from the day after the Sabbath during unleavened bread.
7 weeks of counting.
And that counting culminates in the 50th day, which is the Feast of Weeks, Shawbhuwwowth.
So the counting isn't just ticking off days on a calendar.
No, according to the sources, it's presented as a period of intense spiritual anticipation. You're building towards something significant on that 50th day.
And the number 7 itself is huge in Scripture.
Oh, definitely. It represents completeness, covenant, consecration. So counting 7 sevens is seen as reaching a kind of fullness.
Completion of completions.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
A fullness that leads to fruitfulness. The sources see this pattern mirroring things like gestation periods, spiritual maturation, and prophetic fulfillment throughout the biblical narrative.
Okay, so we have this rhythm starting right back in creation, this pattern of sevens. Where do we see this Pentecost pattern show up as a major event, according to these sources?
Well, the sources point directly to the wilderness experience, specifically Shmouth. That's Exodus chapters 19 through 24.
Exodus 19, Sinai.
Exactly. This is presented as a powerful, really vivid picture of Pentecost unfolding.
And this happens, what, 50 days after the Exodus from Egypt?
Precisely 50 days later, Yasharel Israel, there's our ah sound in Yasharel, is gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai to meet with the Creator.
And the scene is just intense.
Oh, incredible. Thunder, lightning, fire, the mountain itself trembling. They hear the 10 words spoken. But the sources really stress this is much more than just the giving of law.
More than rules.
Much more. It's the formation of a covenant relationship. It's often likened to a marriage ceremony between YHWH and his people.
A marriage covenant. Okay. And is there a specific moment they pinpoint?
Yes, the moment of ratification. The sources highlight Exodus 24, specifically verses 4b through 11.
What happens there?
Blood is sprinkled. Moses calls it the blood of the covenant. Young men offer sacrifices, and significantly, 70 elders actually go up the mountain, and the text says they see the Elohim of Yasharel. Elohim with that ow sound.
They see God.
That's what the text says. And this whole event, this moment, is interpreted by the sources as the conception of the tabernacle project, right, of the plan for God to dwell among his people.
Ah, the blueprint is conceived there.
Right. And it also foreshadows an even greater covenant yet to come. It's seen as a clear divine initiation event happening precisely at this appointed time, Shawbhuwwowth.
Now, what's really interesting is the sources then take a step back, right?
Right.
Even before Sinai into Genesis, to find earlier pictures or foreshadowings of this same Pentecost pattern.
Yes, exactly. They describe this using a kind of skipping rock structure, or maybe think of it like storyboard segments.
Showing the pattern was there earlier.
Suggesting this design was present conceptually from the very beginning. We touched on day 4 of Old Creation Week already, the setting of the luminaries for signs and appointed times.
Linking light and timing.
Right, linking light, which they often see as revelation, to this divine timing. And the source connects this to the purpose of the future bride, the assembly, to bear light and align with divine timing.
Okay, then they point to the deep sleep of Adam, Adham, in Genesis 2. Adham and the soft DH.
Yes, Adham. This is a really striking parallel the sources draw.
How so?
Well, Adham enters this deep sleep, which is seen as symbolic of death. A rib is taken from his side, literally a part of him, close to his heart, and it's formed into the woman, Eve. He then awakens, sees her, and instantly recognizes her. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh.
Okay, so what's the Pentecost connection they make?
The parallel they draw is this. The bride is brought to the first Adam in this manner. Just as the bride, meaning the spiritual assembly, the church is presented to the Messiah, the second Adam, on Pentecost.
Ah, okay. The presentation of the bride.
And they connect this even further to the Messiah's side being pierced on the cross, giving forth water and blood.
John 19.
Right. This is seen as symbolizing the birth of the spiritual bride and the ratification of the new covenant, which this perspective specifically places on the day of Pentecost, the moment the bride comes forth.
That's a deep connection.
Yeah.
What else in Genesis?
The sources also mention the family of Noah, highlighting the wife of Shem, that A sound like I and say.
Shem's wife. How does she fit?
It's presented within a specific numerical structure the sources identify in the text. They note a pattern, point 7, point 1, point 4, point 2, point 5, point 3, point 6, and see Shem's wife as a focal point within this framework, suggesting she's indicative of this foundational design element related to lineage and covenant. It's quite detailed.
Okay, the structural parallel.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Then they look at the bride of Isaac, Yitzchak. Yitzchak, like Yitz. It's like, oh.
Rebecca, found by Abraham's servant. Abraham is Abraham.
Abraham, yes. And notice, Rebecca is given gifts when she's chosen, before she even meets Isaac.
The jewelry and clothing.
Exactly. This is presented as a type or a shadow of the covenant relationship being established and the spiritual gifts being given to the bride of the Messiah on Pentecost. Gifts given at the betrothal, so to speak.
Gifts accompanying the covenant. Okay.
And finally, in this Genesis section, Joseph, Yahusef, rises to power. Yahusef, ooh, hey, hi.
Joseph in Egypt.
Right. He's given Pharaoh's signet ring, a symbol of authority, enabling him to rule Egypt, or Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, it's I like I, im like im.
Mitzrayim.
And the source connects this back to day 4 of creation again, likening his rule over Egypt's darkness to the moon ruling the night.
Interesting connection.
And significantly what happens next. He is given Pharaoh's daughter, Asenath, as his bride.
Right. He gets married.
And this marriage, too, in a position of great authority after suffering, is presented as another foreshadowing of Pentecost.
So across these Genesis narratives, Adam, Noah's line, Isaac, Joseph, we see these recurring themes popping up.
Yes. A bride being formed or chosen, a covenant relationship envisioned or initiated, gifts being given, authority being granted.
All viewed through the lens of this Pentecost pattern, this appointed time.
It's a cumulative argument the sources build, finding these echoes. They suggest this isn't random timing, but a deliberate design stretching right back to the beginning.
Okay, moving further into the narrative, the sources propose something pretty remarkable about the conception of the Messiah himself.
Yes, this is a key part of the divine design perspective. It posits that the overshadowing of Mary, Miriam, by the Ruwahh HaQowdesh,
Miriam, Alegi.
The actual moment of conception occurred on Shawbhuwwowth. Shawbhuwwowth is the singular form of Shawbhuwwowth, essentially, on Pentecost.
Wow. So Jesus conceived on Pentecost.
That's the view presented. This timing, according to this perspective, aligns perfectly with this pattern they identify of divine conception or initiation occurring during this specific feast season.
And they connect it to Elizabeth too, right?
Yes. They note that the moment Elishava's son, John the Baptist, leapt in her womb, that's seen as a prophetic stirring. It signals the imminent arrival of both the Messiah's forerunner and Messiah himself, conceived within these two faithful women, timed, they argue, with this very feast.
So Pentecost isn't just a single day, but a season of spiritual conception.
That's how this interpretation frames it. It inaugurated the incarnate word and began the fulfillment of all those ancient promises right on schedule according to this divine calendar.
It creates a really deep link between the Messiah's physical arrival and this appointed time,
suggesting his very conception was timed precisely according to this pattern.
Then we see this pattern again, according to the sources, in the commissioning of the Messiah, Yahshua, at his baptism.
Yeah.
Yahshua with the awe.
That's right. Just as the Book of the Covenant was given and the covenant was sort of conceived or initiated at Sinai on Shawbhuwwowth,
right.
These sources see Yahshua's public ministry being inaugurated, commissioned at Pentecost through his baptism by John Yohanan. Okay, how does that parallel?
Well, think about the scene. The sky opens, the Ruwah descends like a dove, and the divine voice proclaims his approval, "This is my beloved son."
The sources argue this public act directly parallels Sinai. You have the divine voice speaking from heaven. You have a visible manifestation, the Spirit as a dove instead of fire and smoke. And you have the initiation of a covenant mission.
And the second begins.
Exactly. Yahshua steps into his role as prophet, priest, and king. It's seen as not just an echo of the law-giving at Sinai. It's the commissioning of the living Torah embodied. The ultimate representative of the new covenant, initiated right at the appointed time for covenant initiation.
Which brings us finally to the event most people do link with Pentecost today. The outpouring of the Spirit in Acts chapter 2.
Yes, the big one. Here on the day of Pentecost, the Ruwahh HaQowdesh is poured out dramatically.
Tongues of fire, the sound of rushing wind.
Visible tongues of fire resting on the disciples, and they begin speaking in many languages they had never learned before.
And the sources highlight this as like the direct inverse of Babel, right?
Exactly. Where the judgment at Babel scattered humanity in confused language, Pentecost unified people and enabled understanding across linguistic barriers. A reversal.
And critically, this moment is seen as the fulfillment of that prophecy in Jeremiah.
Yirmiyahu Jeremiah 31.33. Yirmiyahu E. The promise that the law would no longer be just external, written on stone tablets.
But written on human hearts.
Written on their hearts by the Spirit.
So, like Sinai, there's sound and fire, a visible manifestation.
Yes, echoes of Sinai. But this covenant established here is different. It's internal, it's personal, and crucially, it's global. It's not limited to one nation at one mountain. It's for all who believe everywhere.
Pentecost in Acts is framed as the birthday of the assembly then, the spiritual bride.
That's exactly how it's presented. It echoes and, in a sense, surpasses the giving of the Torah by bringing its essence to life within believers through the Spirit, commissioning them to carry this new covenant message to the world.
So looking back at this whole journey through your sources, from creation day 4
It's setting the rhythm
to the covenant at Sinai,
a marriage ceremony,
conception of the tabernacle,
to the foreshadowing in Genesis, the conception and public commissioning of the Messiah, his baptism, the start of his mission.
and finally to the outpouring of the Spirit and the birth of the global assembly in Acts.
It's quite a thread. The sources consistently frame Pentecost Shawbhuwwowth as this key marker of divine initiation.
Conception, covenant, commissioning.
Exactly. A feast of conception, covenant, and commissioning. A specific appointed time when, according to this perspective, heaven touches earth to initiate new phases in the divine narrative.
Understanding this consistent pattern, this divine design they describe, it certainly adds a layer of depth, doesn't it, to how one might view the structure and purpose of time itself within the biblical story.
It really does. It suggests that biblical history isn't just a random sequence of events, but is marked by these sacred appointed rhythms for significant divine action.
It truly invites you, the listener, to read the text with that fresh perspective the sources recommend, maybe looking for these deliberate timings yourself.
It's a different way of seeing the connections.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, here's that final provocative thought drawn directly from your sources. Consider how the scattering and confusion of language at Babel stands in such stark contrast and is, in a very real sense, reversed by the unifying act of communication that happens on the day of Pentecost in Acts.
Babel scatters, Pentecost gathers through understanding.
Right. So the question the sources leave us with is, what does that dramatic reversal tell us about the fundamental nature and the global purpose of this new covenant initiated on that day?
A powerful connection to ponder indeed.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into your sources on the divine design of Pentecost.